All right, let's jump right into it. Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to have you here today. If you've been keeping an eye on our oceans lately, you already know the incredibly urgent crisis we're facing, the widespread, devastating decline of natural coral reefs. It is a massive, incredibly complex challenge. But today we are going to look at a truly fascinating solution. We're diving headfirst into the high-tech, highly controlled world of coral farming, specifically the inner workings of what's known as a frag tank setup. This is literally where cutting-edge aquaculture meets large-scale reef restoration, and it is just mind-blowing to see how these specialized systems are engineered to take tiny, fragile coral fragments and turn them into thriving, mature colonies.
Here's the game plan for today's explainer. We're going to cover Section 1, Welcome to the Nursery. Section 2, Mastering Water and Flow. Section 3, Dialing in the Lighting. Section 4, Low-Stress Husbandry. And finally, Section 5, Biosecurity and Sustainable Growth. Let's get to it.
Starting off with Section 1, Welcome to the Nursery, defining the grow-out area.
So, to really wrap our heads around what coral farming entails, we've got to understand our primary tool, the frag tank. Think of this setup like an intensive care unit for marine life. In this highly organized, watertight system, small pieces of coral, which are often just called frags, are carefully mounted to specially designed plugs, discs, or racks. And the entire, absolute purpose of this environment is stabilization. By perfectly regulating the water chemistry and keeping stress to an absolute minimum, these really vulnerable little fragments can actually recover from the fragmentation process quickly and grow reliably into healthy, fully mature colonies that are ready to be planted back into the ocean.
You know, it's actually really helpful to contrast this with something you might be a bit more familiar with, like a standard display aquarium. Your typical display system is mixed, heavily rock-scaped, and honestly designed to look pretty to the human eye. It's like a beautifully landscaped garden. A frag tank? Totally different beast. It is built purely for practicality and uniformity. It's much more like a high-yield hydroponic greenhouse. Function over form, in the absolute best way possible. You're going to see precise shelving, strict grids, and organized compartments. Because this strict physical organization makes it vastly easier for farm operators to track growth, keep conditions incredibly steady, and separate colonies to stop any nuisance organisms from spreading.
Moving right along to Section 2, Mastering Water and Flow, the lifeblood of the system.
Okay, so stable water quality is the undeniable foundation of the entire operation. You literally cannot build a reef in dirty water. To get that perfect environment, farms use a heavy-duty combination of advanced filtration approaches. This is basically a three-step defense line. First, mechanical filtration physically pulls out floating debris. Then, protein skimming actually extracts dissolved organic waste right out of the water before it even has a chance to break down. And finally, you have the biological media. This provides a massive surface area for beneficial bacteria to set up shop, and those bacteria work tirelessly to process harmful nitrogen compounds out of the water column. It's a brilliant, multi-stage defense keeping everything absolutely spotless.
But here's the catch. Clean water just isn't enough on its own. It has to move correctly. Cleanliness absolutely must be paired with very specific water movement. Corals need gentle, consistent circulation to exchange gases and shed detritus, basically to breathe and keep themselves clean. Now imagine the difference between getting hit by a gentle, sweeping breeze versus a fire hose. A harsh, direct blast of water can literally tear the delicate, healing tissue right off of a recovering coral fragment. Because of that, these setups use carefully configured pumps to create a broad, indirect, sweeping current across the fragile corals.
And right alongside flow, we have temperature control, which brings incredibly high stakes to the table. Maintaining strict temperature control is simply non-negotiable in a frag tank. Coral farms rely on highly accurate, continuous heating and cooling systems paired with 24/7 monitoring. Think about it. Whether there's a scorching summer heat wave or a freezing winter blizzard outside the facility, the water inside must remain perfectly stable. Any significant temperature swing causes immense stress to the corals, which leads to slowed growth or, worst-case scenario, massive batch losses. Predictability here is absolutely everything.
Let's look at Section 3, Dialing in the Lighting, Powering Recovery and Growth.
So you've got the water perfectly clean and flowing, right? But without the right light, nothing is going to happen. Lighting is arguably the single biggest performance driver in a coral grow-out system. To achieve maximum efficiency, modern frag tanks rely heavily on programmable LEDs. And what makes these so powerful is that they can be precisely tuned for both intensity and spectrum. Because different coral species respond entirely differently to light, farmers can adjust these energy profiles exactly, essentially giving these corals a custom-tailored sunrise and sunset every single day. They provide the exact wavelengths needed to support initial tissue healing right after fragging, and then seamlessly shift to the optimal spectrums needed to fuel that rapid long-term tissue growth. But you definitely can't just blast a brand new fragment with high-intensity light and call it a day. That's a recipe for disaster. There is an exact, step-by-step procedure operators use to keep things safe. Step 1. They introduce new frags to the lighting very gradually. Step 2. They use strict acclimation periods. This ramping up of light is critical to reduce the risk of coral bleaching, which is what happens when a coral is completely shocked by light that is just too bright, too fast. And finally, step 3. Once the corals are acclimated, operators fine-tune their physical placement. They'll actually move the colonies higher up or lower down on the egg crate racks to perfectly match the specific light level that particular coral needs to thrive.
Which brings us to Section 4, Low-Stress Husbandry, Nutrient Balance and Handling. We have to remember that even with the perfect aquatic machine, we are still dealing with living, breathing organisms. After a coral is cut or fragged, it is highly vulnerable. So careful, low-stress physical handling is absolutely paramount. Corals are meticulously mounted onto plugs in ways that specifically protect their newly exposed tissue. This also keeps them from drifting loose and bumping into each other, which would just compound their stress. Plus, farmers have to operate with profound patience. They pay incredibly close attention to the timing of any environmental shifts. Fragments are given plenty of time to show visible signs of healing before the operator even thinks about increasing the water flow or adjusting the lighting intensity.
Next up, mealtime. While corals get a ton of energy from light, many also need to physically capture nutrients. Farms generally use two different feeding strategies depending on the species they're raising. Some operations use targeted feeding, which means they are meticulously delivering nutrients directly to certain coral polyps. Others rely more on maintaining incredibly stable water chemistry and letting natural plankton in the system do the feeding. But here is the big takeaway you should remember. No matter the method, any nutrient dosing absolutely must be paired with rigorous, regular testing. Because if a farmer overfeeds without tracking it, they risk dangerous swings in water chemistry, massive algae blooms, and a total loss of water clarity. And that can severely harm those sensitive little fragments.
Honestly, treating the coral farm exactly like a strict scientific laboratory is what yields the best results. Because farms produce multiple batches of coral over time, meticulous record-keeping is the absolute backbone of their quality control. We're talking tracking frag dates, coral species, growth rates, survival rates, the whole shebang. By analyzing this massive amount of data, farmers can constantly refine their husbandry practices. They figure out precisely which specific combinations of light, flow, and feeding lead to the absolute best outcomes for the next batch.
And now for our final section, Section 5, Biosecurity and Sustainable Growth, Defending the Nursery.
Let's pause and consider a nightmare scenario for a moment. You have hundreds, maybe thousands, of incredibly vulnerable recovering coral fragments packed tightly together on uniform racks. What happens when a pathogen, or maybe a tiny coral-eating flatworm, or an aggressive invasive algae strain sneaks into this high-density nursery? The reality is pretty terrifying for a farmer. In these dense grow-out environments, tiny issues can escalate with devastating speed. A small slip-up could potentially wipe out months of hard work and thousands of corals in a matter of days.
So to combat this, farms employ rigorous, almost medical-grade biosecurity defenses. It is all about contamination control. New arrivals, strictly isolated. Incoming frags go through dedicated quarantine protocols before they ever even touch the main farm water. Tools like bone cutters and tweezers are aggressively cleaned and sterilized between handling different colonies so there's no cross-contamination. Operators very carefully control how and if water is shared across different systems. And if early warning signs of pests do pop up, their rapid response tactics are immediate. They instantly isolate affected colonies, radically adjust the flow, or overfilter the system to prevent a minor outbreak from destroying the entire batch.
And that quote right there brilliantly illustrates our main takeaway today. A commercial frag tank is not a hobbyist fish tank sitting in someone's living room. Not even close. It is a highly sophisticated, meticulously managed ecological factory. It relies on relentless consistency, intense data tracking, and uncompromising biosecurity to mass-produce complex marine life.
Which leaves us with a truly inspiring thought to close out this explainer. By treating frag tanks as these tightly controlled production environments, we're actually learning how to grow coral livestock faster and more predictably than ever before in human history. As sustainable coral farming continues to mature and scale up, could these highly engineered, watertight nurseries actually be the ultimate key to fulfilling the massive demands of global coastal conservation? It's a pretty fantastic question to ponder, and honestly, the incredible science behind these systems gives us a whole lot of hope for the future of our oceans. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep learning.